At 11:52 on the worst night of the heat dome, my upstairs neighbor knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to go swimming. 30 minutes later, we were standing at the edge of the building's rooftop pool, the city glowing amber 20 floors below us, and I was realizing she hadn't brought a swimsuit. The way she looked at me when I noticed made it clear. That wasn't an accident. My name is Archer Blaine. I was 28 that summer, working as a facilities technician for a mid-rise condo in East Vancouver, which meant I was the person who fixed the boilers, replaced the fan coil units, and got texts at 2 a.m. from residents who'd tripped a breaker trying to run 3 AC window units on one circuit. The deal with the job was simple. Keep everything running, be available, live in Unit 203 for a rate that, in this city, bordered on miraculous. I'd spent that Wednesday crawling through the mechanical room in 38-degree heat because a dome had parked itself over the lower mainland for the third consecutive day. And every single resident had decided this was the moment to test the limits of their portable air conditioners. Lytton had already broken national temperature records the week before. The rest of BC was catching up. By the time I got back to my unit, showered, and pressed a cold Nalgene bottle to the back of my neck, I had zero interest in leaving. I lay on top of my sheets, listening to the city's hum, and pretended the ceiling fan was doing anything useful. Thea Bellamy lived on the 6th floor. She'd moved into 612 about 8 months earlier, coming from a rental in Mount Pleasant that her landlord had decided to redevelop. She was 25 and worked as a prop stylist and set dresser for film and television productions. Vancouver being one of those cities where half the people you meet in a coffee shop are somehow tangentially connected to the industry. She had strong opinions about continuity errors, kept a color-coded spreadsheet of every prop warehouse in the lower mainland, and once spent 40 minutes in the laundry room explaining why a particular 1970s rotary phone she'd sourced for a period drama was wrong in 3 separate and deeply specific ways. I didn't mind. She was the kind of person who was interesting to disagree with. She'd moved in with her boyfriend, Brett. Brett sold commercial real estate, wore slim-fit joggers to the gym, and once asked me, in complete sincerity, whether building maintenance was something I was planning to do long-term or just a stepping stone. I said I found it satisfying. He nodded the way people nod when they've stopped listening. Brett moved out 4 months before the heat dome. I won't pretend I hadn't noticed. After he left, Thea and I started talking more. Nothing obvious. She'd stop in the lobby when she saw me checking the mail. I'd linger near the amenity room door when I knew she was coming back from a shoot. We overlapped in that way neighbors do when something's shifted slightly. Like furniture rearranged in a room you know by feel. The conversations got longer. Funnier. She started giving me updates on whatever production she was working on, and I told her about the stranger maintenance calls I'd handled. The woman on the 14th floor who'd carpeted her balcony. The guy who'd been methodically drilling holes in his walls, trying to find a stud without a stud finder. I liked talking to Thea. I liked it more than I was comfortable with, which was why I kept the conversations to the lobby. 18 months before all of this, I'd ended a 4-year relationship with a woman who had wanted me to be a different version of myself. Not cruelly. She wasn't cruel. She just kept leaving articles on my phone about trades workers upgrading to project management roles, mentioning that her firm was hiring coordinator positions. She was a civil engineer. I was the guy who fixed the building. She'd decided at some point those two things weren't compatible with the future she was building in her head. When we finally said it out loud, we were both relieved enough that the sadness didn't arrive until later. After that, I made a rule for myself. No relationships built on proximity and convenience. No falling for someone just because she was there every day. I'd seen what happened when you confused availability for connection. Dating the woman who lived 2 floors above me felt like a very creative way to break that rule. So when Thea knocked on my door at 11:52, wearing a light linen shirt and holding a keycard I didn't recognize, I opened it expecting the usual, a loud neighbor, a dripping faucet, the ice maker making the sound again. "Do you want to go swimming?" she asked. I leaned against the door frame. The pool closes at 9. I know. She held up the keycard. Strata gave me an extra access fob when I joined the amenity committee, It still works after hours. That's not an invitation to swim. That's a bylaw violation. That's a very formal way to say you want to come. I looked past her into the hallway. The building was quiet. The corridor AC had been struggling all day. The rooftop pool, at midnight, in a heat dome. The water's been sitting in direct sun for 3 days, she said. It's going to feel like a bathtub up there. The best possible bathtub. It was so hot in my unit that my body chose her version over the logical one. Give me 2 minutes. The rooftop deck was 12 floors up, accessible by elevator with the right fob. It wasn't a large pool, maybe 8 meters end to end, a narrow strip of artificial turf around the edge, and a view of East Van that at midnight was genuinely stunning. The city lights pressed back against the dark sky. The North Shore Mountains were a black shape against slightly less black sky, and somewhere beyond Burnaby, a cluster of cranes blinked red. Thea walked to the edge of the pool and looked down into the water. The surface caught the reflection of a nearby patio light and rippled it into something warmer. I set my towel on one of the loungers. How often do you come up here after hours? First time, she said. I've been saving it. For what? She turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a night that warranted it. I pulled my shirt over my head. When I looked up, she wasn't looking at the pool. I didn't say anything, she said, though her mouth had curved. Okay. I'm just observing that you clearly don't sit at a desk. I crawl through mechanical rooms for a living. It shows. She tilted her head. That's a compliment. I know. I moved toward the pool, then stopped. She hadn't brought a bag. No towel rolled under her arm. Nothing. Just her keycard and her keys and the linen shirt I could now tell she'd pulled on over a tank top. Did you bring a swimsuit? I asked. Thea met my eyes. The city below us glowed. The pool sat still and warm between us. No, she said. I waited for a follow-up, a laugh, an explanation. She just held my gaze. You knew that before you knocked on my door, I said. Yes. And you knocked anyway. I've been wanting to knock for a while, she said. I just needed a reason that wasn't obviously the real reason. I should have made a joke. I was good at that, deflecting with something dry and walking us both back to the comfortable distance where I'd decided we belonged. But it was almost midnight and 37 degrees, and she was looking at me in a way that made every careful argument I'd constructed about proximity and convenience feel like it had been written by someone else. You could have just knocked, I said. Could I? The honest answer was no. I'd been making sure she couldn't. She turned toward the water. I'm getting in. Don't look. I didn't say I was going to. Don't anyway. I faced the North Shore Mountains and listened to the small sounds behind me. Soft rustle of fabric, a pause, a quiet splash. Then, okay. I turned. Thea was in the water up to her shoulders, her hair loose and dark around her. Her clothes sat folded in a neat pile on the artificial turf. The pool was warm. She'd been right about that. It wrapped around me like something that had been waiting. We floated near the center, keeping a few feet between us. The heat dome had leached the urgency out of everything. Time moved differently up there, stretched and slow, the city noise muffled by altitude. Tell me something you haven't told anyone, she said. That's a big opening. We're breaking strata bylaws together. I think we've moved past small talk. I looked at the sky. No stars, light pollution and summer haze. I almost quit this job 8 months ago, right before you moved in. She turned in the water. Why? Someone told me I was wasting my potential, said it like maintenance was something you did until you figured out your real life. I paused. It stayed longer than it should have. That's her voice, Thea said, not a question. Yeah. Still? Less than it used to be. She was quiet for a moment. I think what you do is hard and specific, and not everyone can do it. You keep an entire building running. People sleep because of what you fix. She turned to float on her back. Anyone who made you feel small about that was doing it for their own reasons. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized I was holding. Your turn, I said. She kept floating. I've been offered a contract, a big one. For a production? For a firm, Production design, visual identity, set curation for a boutique company that does high-end commercial and editorial, offices in Toronto. They want someone full-time to run their props and environment division. A pause. I found out last week. The pool suddenly felt cooler. That sounds like what you've been working toward, I said carefully. It is. Her voice was even. That's the problem. I swam toward her slowly. What do you mean? She righted herself and treaded water, closer now. I followed Brett here. When we were together, he got a job offer in Vancouver, and I said yes because I loved him and didn't want to lose him. So I built a career here. I built a life here, and then he left anyway. She looked at the city lights, and I finally feel like this is mine. My city, my industry connections, my crew, and now the best opportunity I've ever been offered is in a place I've visited twice. Are you telling me because you've already decided, or because you haven't? She looked at me then, directly. I'm telling you because I trust you, and because I've been trying to figure out whether there's a reason to stay that isn't just fear dressed up as belonging. The gap between us in the water was maybe 2 feet. Is there? I asked. That depends on whether I've been imagining things, she said, for the past 4 months. I knew exactly what she meant. I'd spent those 4 months actively managing the distance between us. You haven't been, I said. She let out a long breath. Okay. Okay. Okay, I haven't been imagining it. That's okay. Articulate. She laughed, and the sound traveled across the dark water and came back to me differently. I moved until only a foot of pool separated us. She stayed still. I've been keeping you at arm's length, I said. On purpose. I noticed. I kept telling myself it was the proximity, that I'd ruin a good neighbor relationship and wake up embarrassed. And now? Now I think I was just scared. I paused. Of the same thing you are, actually. Giving something real and watching it leave. Thea's expression shifted into something unguarded. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. I've been practicing. She moved closer. Stop practicing, she said. Just talk to me. So I did. We stayed in that pool until almost 2 in the morning, talking in the way you can when the city's asleep and the heat has stripped away the version of yourself you present to other people. She told me about growing up in Kamloops, driving the Coquihalla in her first BC winter, the feeling of realizing she was staying in Vancouver after Brett left. Half grief, half something that felt like being handed something back. I told her about the relationship that ended, about the year afterward, when I fixed every problem in this building except the one I was carrying around, about how I'd started confusing self-sufficiency with being fine. At some point, without deciding to, we were floating side by side with the pool's edge at our backs, and her shoulder was against mine. Archer, she said quietly. Yeah. I wasn't imagining this, was I? No. Then stopped thinking and I kissed her before she finished the sentence. Her hand found the side of my face, wet and warm, and she kissed me back with 4 months of careful distance behind it. The water moved around us. The city hummed below. When we pulled apart, she pressed her forehead to mine. Okay, she said again, softer, a different meaning entirely. You have to stop saying that. I can't help it. My vocabulary has left the building. I laughed and pulled her slightly closer, and she let me. We got out eventually, towelled off with what I'd brought, and sat on the edge of the pool with our feet in the water. Thea leaned into my shoulder. I put my arm around her. It felt like something that had been waiting to happen, not something new. So, she said, what happens when we go back down? I take you to dinner tomorrow. She lifted her head. An actual date? Actual one. Nowhere on this building's property. You have work. I'll survive. She smiled, and I felt it against my shoulder. Look at you, making plans. I'm trying. She turned slightly toward me. There's still the Toronto thing. I'd been waiting for it to come back. Tell me more about it, I said. She did. A real description this time. A 12-month contract to start, option to stay permanently. The firm had a reputation that mattered in her industry. She would lead a team. She would have a budget. She would be the person deciding the vision rather than executing someone else's. While she talked, I watched her face. She got the same brightness she got when she explained a set decision she was proud of. Faster words, hands slightly more animated. She was lit up by it. You should take it, I said. She went quiet. Not as a way out, I said. I mean that watching you talk about it is like watching someone describe a room they've been trying to find for years. That's very poetic for nearly 2 a.m. Thea. She looked at me. I know, she said. I know I should. Then, why haven't you? She looked at our feet in the water. Because I finally stopped letting someone else's choices dictate mine. And I don't want to make this one just because an opportunity exists. I want to make it because it's what I actually want. She paused. But I also spent the last 4 months hoping you'd say something, and you never did. And now you've said something, and it's midnight, and I have to answer them by Friday. Friday was 3 days away. I reached for her hand on the pool's edge. Answer them yes, I said, and let me take you to dinner tomorrow so we can figure out the rest. The way she looked at me when I said that, I'll just say it was the best thing that had happened to me in a long time. She texted me at 6:15 the next morning. They moved the deadline. Need an answer by noon today. I was already up. The building's east side fan coil units had flagged overnight, and I'd been in the mechanical room since 5:30. I read the message standing next to a blinking diagnostic panel and felt the whole situation compress into something very small and very heavy. I typed back, "Come down when you're ready." She knocked at 7, still in the same linen shirt, hair unbraided from sleep. She looked like someone who'd been making a decision since the moment she woke up. "Come in," I said. "I just made coffee." She sat at my kitchen table while I poured. Her phone was face down between her hands. "They need someone for a major campaign kickoff," she said. "The regional director, who was supposed to handle it, quit. They want to start in 2 weeks instead of 6. I put the coffee in front of her and sat across from her. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I looked at her hands on the table. "You've already decided," I said. She looked up. "Not because of last night," I said. "You'd decided before you knocked on my door. You came up to that roof because you were saying goodbye to something, and you didn't want to do it alone." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's not entirely fair." "Which part?" "The part where you make it sound like last night didn't change anything. It changed things." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I just don't know what yet." I leaned back. Outside my window, a seaplane banked over the inlet, which was something I still wasn't entirely used to after 3 years in this city. "I don't want you to not go," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't want you looking at me in 6 months, feeling like you left something behind because of one conversation at a rooftop pool." "What do you want then?" The honest version of the answer was harder to say. I said it anyway. "I want more than one evening with you. I've wanted that for months and handled it badly, and I also want you to take this job and be the person I watched you become when you talked about it." I paused. I don't know how both things happen at the same time, but I'm not going to pretend only one of them is true. Thea set her mug down. For a moment she looked like she might cry, and then she didn't. She picked up her phone, turned it over, and called the firm back. I heard fragments. Yes, 2 weeks she could make that work. She had a few logistics to sort, but yes. When she hung up, she sat still for a second. "Done?" I asked. "Done." I moved around the table and crouched beside her chair and took her hand. It was an unusual thing to do. It felt right. "Congratulations," I said, genuinely. She looked at me from close up. "Don't make this easy and then disappear." "I won't." "People say that." "I know," I held her gaze. "I won't." She squeezed my hand once hard and let go. We had dinner that night at a small Georgian restaurant on Commercial Drive she'd been wanting to try for months. She ordered the khinkali. I got the lamb. She ate half my bread before the entree arrived. "That's mine," I said. "We're dating. It's ours." "Are we?" She looked up. "Aren't we?" "I'd like to be." She tore off another piece. "Then it's ours." I laughed and she smiled into her wine glass the way she did when she was trying not to let it show. We talked about the contract properly, all the details. The firm had offices near King West in Toronto. She'd have a team of 3 to start. The salary was a number she said out loud that made me raise my eyebrows, and she grinned. Toronto's expensive, she added. More than Vancouver. Nowhere is more expensive than Vancouver. That's recognized by all international standards. After dinner, we walked along the drive, past the gelato place and the secondhand shop she always slowed down in front of. She found a small ceramic owl in the window and declared it heartbreaking that she couldn't take it to Toronto. Buy it, I said. It'll get broken in the move. Then it'll have had a good few weeks. She bought the owl. She named it on the walk home, which she told me wasn't a thing she normally did. I believed her and also didn't. At the building's lobby door, she turned toward me. So what do we do with 2 weeks? She asked. We stop wasting time, I said, and we find out if this is real outside of a rooftop pool at midnight. And if it is, then we figure out the next part. She stepped closer. That's not much of a plan. It's a start. She kissed me in the lobby, which I was fairly certain was captured on the building's security camera, which I maintained, so I decided that was fine. The next 2 weeks passed the way good things do when you know they're ending. Faster than they should, with a particular quality of attention that only arrives under pressure. I helped her pack on weekends. We had long arguments about which of her vintage props were worth shipping and which would get her in trouble with the elevator's weight limits, since I actually knew what those were. She had a set of ceramic storage crocks she refused to leave behind. I wrapped them myself. We had dinner most evenings, sometimes at hers, sometimes at mine. We learned the small things. That she couldn't sleep with the window open. That I ground my teeth when I was stressed about something I hadn't admitted yet. That she had a very specific way of making drip coffee that she insisted was scientifically superior, and that I started doing too, after about the 3rd lesson. One evening, she pulled out old photography prints she'd taken in her first year in Vancouver. The inlet at low tide, the West End in autumn, the alley behind her old Mount Pleasant apartment. She spread them on her kitchen table and told me which ones she still liked and which ones she'd learned from. I sat across from her and thought about how long I'd been keeping myself out of this room. The night before the movers came, we sat on the fire escape outside her unit with takeout pho from the place around the corner, which we'd jointly established could not be replicated in Toronto, a fact she had verified through research. 11 days, she said. From the pool to tonight. From before the pool, really. She spun a chopstick between her fingers. I'd been circling around this since January. I know. You know? I was counting too, I admitted. She looked at me sideways. You're less oblivious than you pretended to be. I was protecting myself. So was I. She bumped her shoulder against mine. We wasted a lot of January. And February. March. Most of April. She laughed softly. The alley below us smelled like exhaust and the Thai place next door, and the particular summer smell of a Vancouver evening when the pavement finally starts to cool. I wasn't going to forget this. I didn't want to. Come visit me, she said. Don't say you will and then not. Come actually visit. I will. I mean it. Thea, I turned toward her. I'll book the flight before your flight lands. She believed me. I could tell because she stopped asking. Long distance, as it turned out, was not a romantic concept. It was a 4.5-hour flight that still somehow took a full day. It was calling her after work and finding she was already in bed, or texting while she was on set, or eating dinner over video call with a 2-second lag that made it feel slightly like interviewing each other. It was her calling me after a difficult week when 2 of her team members handed in notice simultaneously, and staying on the phone until she'd worked through the frustration and reached the part underneath where she was still proud of what she was building. There were good parts, too. The visits became events. I flew to Toronto in October, and she showed me the city like she was proud of it, which she already was becoming. She came back to Vancouver in November for a long weekend, and we drove up to Squamish in the rain, ate too much poutine at a diner on the Sea to Sky, and talked for 7 hours, like the drive was short. At 4 months, I started looking at the trades landscape in Toronto. Not because she'd asked me to, because I'd started asking myself where I wanted to be in 2 years, and the answer was less about a city and more about a person. At 5 months, I reached out to a property management firm there with 400 residential units and a maintenance team that was, by all accounts, understaffed. They offered a call. I called Thea before I called them back. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay." If I said I was looking at positions in Toronto, would that feel like pressure? Or something else? She was quiet long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then she said, "It would feel like you." "What does that mean?" "It means I'd believe you. I wouldn't spend the next 6 months waiting to see if you meant it. I'd just believe you." I accepted the interview. The firm offered me a role with a better title, a structured schedule, and, finally, benefits that didn't require me to live in the building I maintained. I gave Vancouver 6 weeks to hand things over properly and close out a chapter I'd been grateful for. Thea found a 2-bedroom near Leslieville that she said had good light and a suspicious number of built-in bookshelves, and asked whether I wanted to see photos before she signed. I said yes. We moved in together in February. The ceramic owl from Commercial Drive survived the trip in Thea's carry-on. Wrapped in a scarf, she put it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. "It watches us do dishes," I said. "It's keeping watch over us." I didn't argue. The following summer, we flew back to Vancouver for a long weekend. A friend of hers was getting married in Deep Cove. We stayed near Gastown and spent 2 days doing everything that felt like ours. The drive, the faux place, the inlet walk when the mountains came out from behind the clouds. On our last night, I held up a building key fob I'd never quite gotten around to returning. Old habits. It still worked. I'd checked. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Thea asked. "I'm suggesting the rooftop pool is probably still warm from the day." She raised an eyebrow. "That's technically still a bylaw violation." "I know. We don't live there anymore." "I know." She looked at me. This time she said, "I actually brought a swimsuit." We went up anyway. The pool looked exactly the same, small, warm, the city spread below, the North Shore mountains dark against the sky. We sat on the edge first, feet in the water, not saying much. She leaned into me. I put my arm around her. A year and a bit before, I'd been the man who spent 4 months carefully managing the distance between himself and the thing he actually wanted. I'd had reasons. They seemed very reasonable until I was standing on a rooftop on the hottest night of the year and understood that I was more afraid of regret than risk. Thea slid off the edge into the water. She looked up at me. "Well," she said. I didn't hesitate. "What would you have done if your neighbor knocked on your door at midnight with a key card she wasn't supposed to use after hours? Have you ever waited too long to say something that mattered? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want shorter, exclusive stories every week with no ads, we've opened memberships through the link below. Hit subscribe, leave a like if this one found you at the right moment, and I'll see you in the next one.